Once again, we're visiting one of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo. This time around, it's an action RPG title named Secret of Mana. It's a very simple game to play, but its gradual difficulty curve and overall addictiveness make it a blast to play. Of course, I'm not just going to tell you it's an amazing game, I'm going to explain why. First, as I normally do, let's start off with the story. You play as a kid who begins on an adventure along a cliffside but falls to the water below. Apparently he's a bit clumsy, but he lands with no damage and tries to follow the path back to his hometown of Potos. His life is changed when he finds a sword resting in a tree trunk. Upon lifting it, you start slaying rabbit-like creatures named Rabbites, and when you finally reach Potos, you're banned from it soon after. The reason for this is that it's the Mana Sword, a legendary blade that protects the town from any evil creatures. The sword was lifted due to a dramatic decrease in the world's mana supply, and because of this, you are sent on a journey by a man named Gemma to power up the sword and fight an ancient weapon known as the Mana Fortress. You don't proceed on alone though. In one of two possible methods, you meet a woman who is after her boyfriend, a major in their army. He had disappeared and she wished to look for him, and since you have a sword, she enlists your help in finding him. Both her and the boy get twisted up in a new plotline revolving around dialogue. Finally, you have one more companion, a little sprite who has amnesia. He's an arrogant, cocky little bastard, but he does eventually show his heart. His storyline doesn't get too involved until near the end of the game, but once it does, you feel sorry for the little guy. Oh, and the reason why I haven't given any names? You have to name every character. NPCs have their own name, but heroes do not. So in this case, I named the boy Reaper, the girl Celeste, and the sprite Gao. Similar to another game, right? Another Squaresoft game even. Yes, I like Final Fantasy VI, what can I say? Anyway, back on topic. The game is a combination of an overhead action game with RPG elements included. In the beginning of the game, you're running around from place to place, trying to activate what's called the Mana Seeds. These seeds give the sword more power, allowing it to become more powerful. The secondary use to activating these seeds is to allow your magic to gain higher levels. You aren't allowed to get completely lost though. The game often tells you where you need to go next. If you enter the wrong area, you'll usually know it because your ass would be kicked within a few seconds. One of the most interesting things about this game is the combat. It's very simple given the control scheme. You run up to an enemy and hit B to slash your weapon. You can keep swinging away, dealing hits with minimal damage, or you can do what you're supposed to, wait till the meter on the bottom of the screen reaches 100%, and then attack, because that's when it's a fully strengthened blow. You can also hold down the B button to power up your weapon. By doing so, attacks will come slower, but typically they deal much more damage than regular attacks. The power up level depends on how many times you forged your weapon with weapon orbs. One of the things you will want to do, though, is customize how your AI-controlled partners behave in battle. By default, they're set to stay far away, and only attack if enemies get in range of them. This makes the game a little bit more difficult for you, since you won't be getting much automatic support. Your other method of attack is magic. First, although everyone attacks automatically with physical strikes, magic is never used without you activating it first. The boy doesn't get any because the sword eventually becomes a devastating weapon. However, both the girl and the sprite get magic a short time into the game. The problem with the magic is that sometimes when you select it, it's not casted. This is typically because the player is getting damaged, but sometimes it just seems like it doesn't want to go through, so you just need to activate it again. In order to obtain new spells, you need to find the various elemental spirits, who are typically hiding out in palaces housing the seeds. These elementals will give you 3 spells each. The girl wields defensive and supportive magic, while the little bastard is knowledgeable in the offensive magics. In order to activate it, you hit X to bring up a partner's menu, choose the magic you want, and then target the enemy or player. It's very simple to use, and that's because of the menu system. The menu is in the form of a ring. When pressing Y for your current player or X for a partner, the menu pops up around the character. By pressing up or down, you'll change rings, going from additional options, supportive items, weapons, and in some cases magic. It may seem a bit odd, but once you get used to it, it's very easy to use. And one more thing about the combat of the game. This isn't your typical action RPG. It's actually cooperative. Once you get your AI-controlled partners, you can actually have a friend control them. Makes the game a little bit more fun if you have somebody to play it with you. So now that I told you about the basics of the combat, I guess I should explain why it's not just your standard game. First, it's very hands-on and customizable. Do you want to attack with physical attacks or magic? What weapon do you want to use? There's about 8 possible weapons that you can wield, and each has its pros and cons. I would recommend staying away from the ranged weapons though, because although you do get a little bit more range out of them, they miss way too often. To list all of the weapons, you get a sword, spear, gloves, boomerang, bow, whip, axe, and a javelin. Each one of these has its own individual power level with each character. So if the boy has a sword at level 5, the girl can have it at level 2. Think of it almost as a comfort level. In order to level up the weapons, you just need to attack things with them. With each level up, you gain a bit of power and can increase the power up level. However, as I said, the maximum level each weapon can have is based on how many times you forged it. Basically, when defeating most bosses, you gain a weapon orb. You can bring the orb in the weapon of Watts, the dwarven blacksmith. He'll forge everything for you. Well, for a price that is. It's all worth it though, because unlocking the hidden potential in each weapon, it makes it more powerful for you. Therefore, it makes your job completing the game a little bit easier. Also, magic is leveled in the same way, but it doesn't require a blacksmith. You just keep casting it repeatedly, and it'll gain a level. Naturally, the higher the level, the more power it gets. The trick with leveling up the supportive spells is to cast them at ends before you rest. This is actually an easy way to level the only healing spell you get. You may think that only one restore ability might become underpowered later on, especially since you get it very early in the game, but if you level it that early, it can easily heal the entire party in one casting. There's more supportive spells, such as elemental melee attacks, defense buffs, and the such, but I found them to be fairly useless, so never really used them. The girl does manage to get a few attack spells, although they are fairly weak. She does get a holy spell though, as is the custom for the supportive character in RPGs, but it's fairly costly to cast, and only the sprite gets a mana leech skill. If the girl's mana pool runs low, you'll need to use a restorative item, the fairy walnut, to replenish it. This typically doesn't cause too much of an issue though. One last thing about the combat. It's smooth. Other than the hiccups with the magic casting, there's no real breaks in this action. Even when you need to bring up the menu, it really doesn't get away from the gameplay. Okay, so let's finally move on past the combat. Let's proceed on to the graphics. The visuals as a whole are all really bright and vibrant. I've always been impressed with waterfalls in games, and this one is no exception. The water effects themselves look kind of bland, and could have possibly been a bit better, but they still don't look too bad. The characters and enemies all have some great details, especially the bosses. Finally, the magic looks simplistic, but detailed. It's still pretty cool to see the colored gradients over the targets of the spells. Another cool effect is that as your magic gets more powerful, the size of the spells actually get larger. Finally, let's move on to the sound, but more specifically the music. It's amazing. It's unlike any of what I've heard on the SNES. I can't remember if I've ever played any other games with drums that sound so lively. The music is upbeat no matter what area you're in. Most notably though, is the boss music. It's simply fantastic. It feels frantic and critical. It has the tone that if you don't defeat the boss, the journey is over no matter what. I love this music. So, why is this game so good? It's a mixture of all the things I already discussed. Most of all though, it's the combat. The smooth transitions between physical and magical attacks makes the game proceed flawlessly. But I'm not done with the review yet, because there's one other thing that you can get access to. A dragon. Flammy is found as a young dragon without a parent alive. The nearby king assists you with raising him, and soon after, he's a giant beast that carries the party around the world. It's impressive to see the Mode 7 graphics at work, and with Flammy flying around like this, it's neat to travel. You can get access to a large amount of areas, plus some areas that are necessary for the very few side quests you get. Not everything is perfect with this though. Although you're told where to go, often you're not entirely sure where exactly it's at. The game includes a map, but by using it, your refresh is annoyingly slow, and you can't quit out of it until it's completely loaded. I swear it prints like a dot matrix printer. I said that the difficulty increases in a gradual curve, but once you get to the Mana Fortress, it gets a bit more difficult. Especially if you didn't pick up the best armor. If not, expect to be destroyed in about 3 hits or so. Also, the sword you're carrying is supposed to be the Mana Sword, but the only official way to actually fully unlock its potential is during the final boss battle, where you cast mana magic on it. However, there's a slight glitch you can utilize to get the sword permanently. If you do it this way, you get to use the Mana Sword throughout the game, and it's incredibly overpowered, requiring just a few hits to kill anything. It makes the Mana Fortress a bit easier, but it's also easily completable without it. Secret of Mana is easily one of the best games on SNES. It has a strong story, great, smooth combat, impressive visuals, and an amazing soundtrack. The game has its challenges, but it's really not enough to get you a ton of frustration. Maybe a bit of challenge would have been nice and made the game a little bit better, but it's still a blast to play. It really is a must-play for any action RPG fan. Final score? 10 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.